If there is no self, what exactly is reborn? You hear it all the time. Buddhists believe in reincarnation, that death isn't the end, that your actions echo into another life, that karma ensures you return again and again until awakening. But here's the problem. The Buddha taught anatta, no self, no soul, no essence, no permanent identity. So if there's no you to carry over, what exactly reincarnates? Is rebirth just a metaphor, or is it a literal cycle? And if it is literal, who is spinning in it? I'm Silent Flame, and this is perhaps the most debated, distorted, and misrepresented concept in all of Buddhism. Is rebirth real, or a cultural inheritance the Buddha never truly endorsed? Let's go back, before the sutras, before the temples, before the doctrines were carved in stone, before the Buddha, the world was already turning. Rebirth isn't unique to Buddhism. Long before the Buddha walked through the forests of India, the idea of life after death was alive and complex. In the Vedic tradition, which predates Buddhism, a person's soul, the Atman, was said to migrate from life to life, bound by karma, ascending or descending through the cosmic order. The Upanishads, composed a few centuries before the Buddha, expanded this. They spoke of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and moksha, liberation from it. Other Indian traditions, like Jainism, also had rebirth at their core. So when Siddhartha Gautama began his spiritual search, he wasn't discovering rebirth. He was responding to a worldview that already assumed it. This is crucial to understand. The Buddha didn't invent the idea of rebirth, he inherited it. But here's where things get interesting. The Buddha's insights weren't about what happens after death. They were about what we take to be life itself. He didn't begin by saying, "You will be reborn." He began by saying, "You are suffering, and here is why." And in that diagnosis, he quietly dismantled the very self that other systems said would travel on. What the Buddha actually said and didn't say, when we turn to the early Buddhist texts, especially the Pali Canon, we find references to rebirth everywhere. The Buddha speaks of his past lives. He speaks of beings being reborn in heavens and hells. He explains karma ripening across lifetimes. And yet, in those same texts, he also says, there is no abiding self. Nothing travels from this moment to the next. So which is it? The answer lies in what the Buddha refused to do. He didn't offer metaphysical declarations. He often avoided direct answers to questions like, does the self survive death? Or is the Tathagata reborn after death? When asked these, the Buddha remained silent, not because he didn't know, but because the question itself was flawed. It's like asking what happens to a flame once the oil runs out, he said. It doesn't go somewhere, it ceases, because the conditions that sustained it are gone. This wasn't nihilism, it was conditionality. Just like there's no flame particle that continues, there's no self particle that reincarnates. But then, what about karma? What about rebirth stories? What about the cosmology? Here's the paradox. The Buddha used the language of rebirth, but stripped it of its eternal soul. He described a process, not a person. In his own words, just as a flame is transferred from one candle to another, but is not the same flame, so too, what continues is a stream of conditions, not a self. So rebirth, in the Buddha's teachings, is not the transmigration of a soul, it's the continuation of causes and effects. The first crack, is anyone really reborn? And here we come to the crack in the foundation. If nothing persists, if consciousness itself is dependently arisen, if even the aggregates dissolve at death, then what is being reborn? The Buddha used the metaphor of dependent origination, a 12-linked chain that explains how ignorance gives rise to suffering and rebirth. But he never inserted a self into that chain. In fact, he said, just as when a mango tree grows from a seed, the fruit is not the seed, but it came from it. So perhaps rebirth isn't about who continues, but what kind of momentum you've set in motion. A wave that crashes, but whose energy pushes another forward. But then we must ask, if there's no one surfing the wave, why care where it lands? Theravada, continuity without a self. Let's begin with the most conservative tradition, Theravada. Rooted in the Pali Canon, it strives to preserve what the historical Buddha actually taught. And yet, it too had to confront the contradiction. If there's no self, what continues? The answer Theravada developed is called the stream of consciousness model. Vijnana Sota, the stream of consciousness. In this view, consciousness doesn't belong to anyone. It is not a thing, but a process, a flow. It arises due to conditions, and when those conditions change, it changes too. So, when the body dies, the conditions of life end, but karmic momentum causes a new stream to begin elsewhere. Like a candle lighting another, not the same flame, not a different one. The Abhidhamma's refinement. In later Theravada scholasticism, particularly the Abhidhamma, this became even more technical. Rebirth happens through a moment called patisandhisita, the linking consciousness. There's no soul that crosses over, just mental factors and karmic seeds. Rebirth happens instantly after death, no soul hovering, no waiting. So is rebirth real, or just karma echoing? This explanation avoids the idea of a permanent self, but still preserves moral accountability across lifetimes. It tries to thread the needle, no soul, but still some continuity. And yet the tension remains. If there's no owner of karma, then who receives its result? Theravada answers, there is no who, there is only the result. Mahayana, compassion beyond identity. If Theravada was cautious, Mahayana was bold. This school emerged centuries later, expanding the canon, reinterpreting the path, and elevating the bodhisattva ideal. And at its heart is a paradox. The bodhisattva vow. A bodhisattva says, I vow to return again and again until all beings are free. But wait, if there's no self, who's returning? The solution, store consciousness, alaya vijnana. In Yogacara, one branch of Mahayana, the idea of a storehouse consciousness was developed. It acts like a karmic reservoir, holding latent seeds, bija, that ripen in future lives. It's not a soul, it's not personal, but it persists. A kind of substrate mind where karma is stored and transferred. The person becomes a process. In Mahayana, you are not a fixed entity. You are a dynamic constellation, a momentary formation of skandhas, thoughts, intentions. But the Bodhisattva's vow transcends even this. It's not someone returning, it's compassion returning. The vow becomes its own momentum, a karmic engine powered by love, not identity. But the danger, when compassion becomes theology, when poetic vows become dogma. In some schools, the Bodhisattva becomes a metaphysical being, a deity-like entity that transcends even death. Rebirth becomes destiny, not metaphor. And the mystery of non-self slowly gets replaced by the certainty of personified rebirth. Vajrayana, rebirth becomes literal again, and now, to Vajrayana, the thunderbolt vehicle, the tantric path. Here, rebirth isn't just a concept, it's a system, a map of subtle energies, a lineage of recognized reincarnated masters. Tulku system, reincarnated lamas. In Tibetan Buddhism, especially Gelug and Nyingma, the idea of Tulku, recognized reincarnations, is central. A lama dies, high monks search for signs of his return. A child is identified, trained, enthroned. The lama continues his work in a new body. It's elegant, it's spiritual, it's political. Karma becomes institution. This system creates continuity of leadership, spiritual heritage, and, at times, power. Many great tulkus have been radiant, wise, and deeply realized. But the institution also opens doors for manipulation. And here, rebirth becomes more than a process. It becomes identity. It becomes a claim. The conflict with early Buddhism. The Buddha never spoke of souls returning. He never taught of reincarnated teachers. He emphasized, all compounded things are impermanent. Do not cling. But in Vajrayana, the idea of returning teachers becomes central, sometimes out of faith, sometimes out of necessity. When belief replaces insight, so how did we go from the Buddha's silence to doctrines of literal rebirth? The answer is complex, but honest. Culture, fear, and longing. Fear of death, desire for meaning. Humans crave continuity. We want to believe we go on. We want justice beyond this life. We want hope when we lose loved ones. And so, even in Buddhism, the idea of rebirth filled the silence. It gave structure, it gave ethics, it gave comfort. But comfort is not the same as truth. Rebirth becomes moral storytelling. In many Buddhist cultures, rebirth became a tool. Be good, or you'll be reborn in hell. Practice virtue, and you'll be reborn as a human or God. Sacrifice now, for the next life will be better. This wasn't always manipulation. Sometimes it was compassion, but it was also a departure. What began as metaphor hardened into metaphysics, and slowly rebirth became literal again, not as mystery, but as mechanism, a system of spiritual cause and effect tied to reward and punishment. And with that, the radical brilliance of the Buddha's insight was buried. So who's right? Theravada says, rebirth happens, but there is no self. Mahayana says, rebirth is the flow of compassion and karmic seeds. Vajrayana says, rebirth is literal, the master's return. But all three disagree with each other, and none of them fully explain the central paradox. How can something continue if nothing persists? Each school tries to preserve rebirth without contradicting no self, and each creates contradictions of its own. So what do we do with this? Do we abandon rebirth entirely? Do we reinterpret it as metaphor? Or do we cling to tradition for safety? Or is there a fourth way, a way that returns not to belief, but to direct seeing? The modern turn, when Buddhists stop believing not all Buddhists believe in rebirth. In fact, some of the most influential modern Buddhist teachers, especially in the West, quietly reject it, not out of rebellion, but out of integrity. Stephen Batchelor, Buddhism Without Beliefs. Stephen Batchelor, a former monk turned writer and teacher, is one of the most outspoken voices in this movement. He calls himself a secular Buddhist and argues that the core of Buddhism is not metaphysical beliefs, but existential practice. In his words, rebirth is a cultural assumption, not a necessary truth of the path. He sees the Four Noble Truths, mindfulness, compassion, and dependent origination as tools for living this life more fully, not preparing for the next one. What if the Buddha used rebirth just to teach? Batchelor suggests that the Buddha spoke in the language of his time, using rebirth and karma as metaphors to reach his audience. Much like a teacher today might say, what goes around comes around, without needing to believe in cosmic justice. The point wasn't the next life. The point was how you live this one. Rebirth, moment by moment. But if we abandon literal rebirth, do we throw away the concept entirely? Not necessarily. Many modern practitioners reinterpret rebirth psychologically, not as the soul moving body to body, but as the mind reinventing itself, moment to moment. Every moment, a new existence. Every thought you have dies, every emotion rises and vanishes. The you reading this sentence is not the you who started this video. Your opinions, memories, identity, they change constantly, subtly, unstoppably. So what if rebirth doesn't mean next life, but this moment? Samsara as habit, not destiny. Maybe samsara isn't a place. Maybe it's a pattern. The cycle of grasping, reacting, fearing, repeating endlessly in this mind, this day, this breath. And maybe liberation isn't at death. Maybe it's when you see through the cycle, right now. Awakening becomes presence, not escape. In this view, you don't need to believe in the next life. You just need to wake up in this one. Rebirth becomes a metaphor for transformation. Rebirth as metaphor, not mechanism. Many teachers, East and West, now frame rebirth not as a mechanism of the universe, but as a mirror of inner growth. Thich Nhat Hanh, continuation, not reincarnation. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh spoke often of continuation, but not as a soul jumping from one body to the next. He said,
My actions are my continuation, my speech, my thoughts, they ripple forward. When he died, his students didn't say, he will be reborn. They said, he is already here, in us. Rebirth becomes responsibility. In this light, rebirth isn't about you going somewhere. It's about what you leave behind in every interaction, every moment. Your kindness becomes someone's healing. Your anger becomes someone's wound. Your presence becomes someone's memory. The you that dies was never really solid, and maybe that's enough. Maybe we don't need a next life to make this one sacred. Maybe the illusion was believing we ever needed to continue when we never even began. But what about the Buddha's past lives? All of this sounds modern, beautiful, comforting. But then comes the hard question, the one critics of secular Buddhism always ask. If rebirth is just a metaphor, why did the Buddha talk about his past lives? In the Pali Canon, the Buddha is said to recall countless former lives as animals, humans, gods. He tells stories of wisdom gained over eons. He describes karmic causes stretching across billions of years. So, was he speaking literally? Did he remember them? Or was he teaching something? Was he revealing truth or offering myth with purpose?
Did the Buddha really remember past lives? Let's return to the ancient texts, because in the Pali Canon, the Buddha says something extraordinary. After his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he claims to have seen hundreds of thousands of his past lives. One birth, two births, 5, 10, 20, 100,000 births, their names, clans, colors, conditions, joys, and sorrows. But what do we do with that? Did the Buddha actually remember all of these? Or was this a form of teaching, symbolic, illustrative, dramatic, myth, or memory? The stories we find in the Jataka tales, narratives of the Buddha's past lives as animals, kings, beggars, even trees, are vibrant, moving, and morally charged. But scholars agree these tales were compiled long after his death. Many were borrowed from folk stories, adapted to serve ethical teachings. So, did the Buddha himself tell them? Or were they told about him to convey his compassion and timeless journey? The function of story, not its fact. Maybe these weren't memories, maybe they were mirrors, not autobiographies, but blueprints, a way of saying, this path doesn't start today. It lives through every act of courage, patience, and truth across all time. Memory, neuroscience, and the illusion of continuity. Let's shift lenses from scripture to science, because today we understand more about memory than ever before. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Memory is not a recording, it is a construction, built, revised, distorted every time we recall it. False memories, real effects. Psychologists like Elizabeth Loftus have shown how easily false memories can be implanted. A suggestion, a dream, a story you were told in childhood can feel as vivid and true as anything you've experienced. And once you believe it, you act from it. So when someone remembers a past life, what exactly are they remembering? The brain seeks pattern, identity, continuity. The mind abhors a vacuum. It wants a story. It wants to know, who am I? Where did I come from? And if this life doesn't give a satisfying answer, the imagination fills in the blanks. This isn't deception, it's survival, regression, hypnosis, and spiritual suggestion. In the 20th century, past life regression therapy became popular. People under hypnosis claimed to remember vivid details of former lives, languages they never studied, names they never heard, traumas that didn't happen to them but still affected them. Coincidence or conditioning? Some of these stories are hard to explain, but many, when investigated, fall apart. Errors in dates, no historical evidence, details matching books or movies the person had forgotten they saw, and the hypnotic state is highly suggestible. If a therapist asks, go back to a time before this life, the mind complies. Galactic archetypes, not ancestors. Perhaps what people access is not literal memory, but the collective imagination,
a reservoir of human stories or deep symbolic truths. You feel like a warrior, a healer, a betrayed lover, a monk in a temple. Maybe you weren't them, maybe you're carrying what they mean. So what does past life mean if it's not real? And now we arrive at a deeper question. If your past life memory isn't factual, can it still be meaningful? The answer is yes, but only if we know what we're looking at. Fire doesn't lie, even if the story does. If you remember being burned at the stake, and you carry fear of authority in this life, maybe it doesn't matter if the event was real. Maybe it's how your psyche is processing pain. Maybe it's how your body stores trauma. Maybe it's a story your soul invented to tell you something it couldn't explain otherwise. The value of metaphor, not mechanism. Rebirth can still matter, not as a literal chain of lives, but as a symbolic map of the inner journey. Each past life is an archetype: the wounded child, the lost pilgrim, the seeker, the fool, the wise one. And these are not who you were, but who you carry. Practice meets experience. The Buddha didn't say, believe your visions. He said, test all things, observe cause and effect, watch the mind. And that includes watching the part of your mind that wants a beautiful story more than an honest one. Cliffhanger. Then, who are you? So let's pause. If the stories are imagined, if the memories are constructed, if there's no soul, then what is you actually made of? You say, I was here before, but who is the I that claims this? The child who fell, the adult who fears, the voice in your mind, the watcher of the voice. If even memory is illusion, what remains? And if nothing solid persists, not name, not form, not soul, not even memory, then what does rebirth actually refer to? What is it that passes on?
What are you made of? The Buddha didn't say the self is evil. He said it's empty, not in the sense that you are worthless, but that you are not what you think. The 5 skandhas, not a self, but a story. In early Buddhist analysis, what we call a person is made up of 5 aggregates: form, the body; matter, feeling, sensations, pleasure and pain, perception; labels, recognition, mental formations; intentions, emotions, habits, consciousness, awareness itself. That's it. No soul, no unchanging core, just 5 interdependent, ever-shifting processes. And the illusion of I arises when we mistake these for something solid. The illusion of the whole, like mistaking a car for a thing, when it's really an assembly of parts. If you remove the wheels, the engine, the frame, where is the car? Likewise, if you investigate your own experience deeply, the you begins to vanish. You are not the parts. You are the story they tell, and even that story is always changing. So, what continues? Here's the paradox. If there is no self, then what could possibly be reborn? The Buddha never gave a single satisfying answer. Instead, he gave metaphors: the flame and the candle. The flame that lights another candle is not the same, but not different. The echo, a voice shouts in a canyon. The sound travels, but is the echo the voice? The wave, a wave arises, moves, crashes, but its energy continues. And so we come to this. It is not the person that continues. It is the pattern, the momentum, the tendency. Karma is continuity without identity, not a soul, not a traveler, but a flow of causes and conditions that moves forward. And just as a thought today shapes your action tomorrow, your life today shapes the conditions that come next. Karma, not justice, but causality. Karma is often misunderstood as cosmic justice, but the Buddha never described it that way. Karma means action, and actions have results, not because someone punishes you, but because causes have effects. No one owns karma. It just unfolds. One of the most radical ideas in Buddhism is this: there is action, but no actor. There is suffering, but no sufferer. What does that mean? It means that when you act from anger, anger itself continues. Not you, not a soul, just anger. And when you act from compassion, that too continues. Karma is momentum, not moral credit. You're not building a ledger, you're creating ripples. And those ripples move through time, through minds, through experience.
but no one owns them. Birth happens without a self being born. The Mahayana philosopher Nagarjuna once wrote, "There is neither birth nor death, neither persistence nor destruction." What does it mean to be born if there's no self to enter? What does it mean to die if there's no entity to leave? Zen says, action happens. No one acts. In Zen, they say, there is doing, but no doer. You walk, but who walks? You think, but where is the thinker? The self is not removed. It was never there. So what is reborn? Events, patterns, consequences, but not a you. Cliffhanger. Can rebirth exist without a reborn? And so we arrive at the strange edge of language. If there's no one to be reborn, can rebirth still be real? If karma continues, but no soul follows, is that still rebirth? Is a forest fire the same fire when it spreads to the next tree? Is a symphony the same music when new instruments join in? Is a thought still your thought when it leads to someone else's suffering or joy? Maybe rebirth is not the return of someone, but the continuation of something. But then we must ask, what is that something, and what does it mean for awakening?
If there is no self, who gets liberated? Let's ask the question that breaks the framework. If there's no one inside, then who wakes up? Who crosses the river? Who becomes free? The Buddha never said, "You will awaken." He said, "Awakening happens when delusion ceases." Liberation is not a possession. It's not something you get. It's not a trophy for the ego. It's the falling away of the one who thought there was something to gain. It's the moment the mirror reflects, but doesn't hold. Then what about compassion? If there's no one to save, why save others? If there's no real you or me, is love an illusion? Number, because even when the self drops away, pain still appears. And compassion is not the response of an ego. It's the natural response of clarity. The bodhisattva, the return without a returner, the bodhisattva vow is often misunderstood. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. But who makes this vow? Who returns? Who delays enlightenment? The answer is no one. The vow is not made by a self. It is what remains when the self dissolves and love continues. Bodhisattva as karmic intention, not identity. The bodhisattva is not a person, but a movement of intention, a wave of compassion, a momentum that carries on, not because someone wills it, but because nothing resists it anymore. It is action without actor, return without returner. I remain because suffering remains. When the ego dies, but the world still burns, action flows. Not because I must save them, but because saving is what is happening, and no one is left to resist. What happens after awakening? If the self falls away, does anything continue? Yes, but it's not what you think. The Buddha, after awakening, he walked, he ate, he taught, he responded, he laughed, he wept. But when asked, "Who are you?" he didn't answer with a name. He said, "I am awake." The awakened one is like fire. Fire burns, not for itself, not with desire, it just burns. An awakened being acts without agenda. Words come, steps happen, teaching flows, and none of it belongs to anyone. The wind moves without will. In the Zen tradition, it's said, the enlightened one walks through the world like the wind through the trees, touching everything, clinging to nothing. This is not passivity, it is the fullness of presence without the burden of identity. Cliffhanger, can action survive the actor? So now we must ask, if action continues after the actor disappears, what is it? If compassion remains, but no self to claim it, is that not a kind of rebirth? A fire passed on, a vow echoed through emptiness, a ripple moving forward without source or center. Maybe this is the deepest meaning of rebirth, not the return of a person, but the survival of love. And if that's true, then what does it mean to practice karma not for yourself, but as an offering with no name? Karma with no one left to carry it. Let's return to karma, but strip it of ownership. In early Buddhism, karma isn't stored in a soul. It's not a moral scoreboard. It's a pattern, an echo, a movement that doesn't need a mover. Karma as empty continuity. Think of a candle lighting another. the flame moves, but it belongs to no one. Or a wave born from wind moving across the ocean. When it crashes, the energy continues. The ocean does not remember, and yet the motion goes on. So does karma. You may disappear, your name may vanish, but the momentum of your actions still moves, and it finds new expressions in the world, in others, in the shape of suffering or healing, living beyond yourself. What happens when you smile at a stranger? They smile at their child. Their child carries that warmth into their day, and someone you'll never meet feels slightly safer in the world. You didn't reincarnate, but you continued, not as a being, but as a movement, as warmth, as presence, your words, your silence, your care. A teacher says one sentence, and a student remembers it 30 years later on the edge of despair. A mother holds her breath in pain so her child can fall asleep. A friend forgives, and something ancient in your nervous system finally softens. None of this is self, but all of it is continuity. This is not metaphor. This is how the world works. You don't continue, but something does. You want to survive. That's natural. But Buddhism doesn't offer that. It offers something stranger and more beautiful. No self, no survival, but infinite continuation. You will die. Your memories will dissolve. Your sense of I will fade. Nothing will move forward with your name, but what you've touched may still grow. The kindness you gave, the harm you caused, the honesty you embodied, the silence you cultivated. Rebirth as resonance. Maybe rebirth isn't your next life. Maybe it's the way your life reverberates in others, like a bell rung in one room being heard in another, or the way the scent of a flower remains in the air long after the petals fall. You're not the flower, but you were the fragrance. Cliffhanger. Do we need rebirth at all? So now we ask the final unsettling question. If nothing passes on, do we need the idea of rebirth at all? If karma flows and compassion survives and the illusion of self has dropped, what exactly are we still trying to keep alive? Are we chasing comfort? Are we clinging to a subtle self? Are we afraid to vanish completely? Or are we ready to live, to love, to act as if this life were enough? And if it is enough, then what does liberation truly mean? What remains when rebirth dissolves? So let's imagine, just for a moment, that there is no rebirth, none. No soul that continues, no karmic echo, no flame passed on, just an end. What then? Do your choices still matter? Does love lose its value? Does awakening become meaningless? Or do these things become even more sacred when they are not guarantees, but gifts? Letting go of the second life. When we release the hope of another life, we land fully in this one. No more waiting, no more cosmic bargaining, no more next time. Just this breath, just this sunrise, just this chance to meet the world without defense. And that might be the beginning of real freedom, living as if this is your only life. What changes if you truly believe this is it? Would you hold grudges longer? Would you chase more praise? Or would you slow down? Would you listen more? Would you love more honestly? Would you leave people a little softer than you found them? Karma becomes presence. If there's no next life, then karma isn't a cosmic law. It's your attention, your actions, right now. Every gesture becomes the only gesture. Every word is your final echo. And in that intensity, you discover something deeper than doctrine. You're already here. The fire that doesn't return. Maybe the goal was never to be reborn. Maybe the goal was to burn completely in this moment. To live so honestly, so courageously, so compassionately that there's nothing left to carry forward. Burn, not for the future, but for the now, like a candle lighting the room before going out, like a tree giving fruit without asking who eats, like a teacher who teaches, then disappears. This is the deepest teaching, the fire that burns away the question, the silence that outlasts the answer. Do we even need rebirth? Maybe we never needed rebirth. Maybe it was a raft, and now we're at the shore. Maybe the idea was useful until we were ready to let it go. Maybe we kept asking, what happens next? Because we were afraid to fully ask, what is happening now? And now you're here, alive, awake, aware. So the final question is not, will you be reborn? The real question is, What will you do with the life you already have? I'm Silent Flame, and I believe the Buddha didn't want us to believe in rebirth or reject it blindly. He wanted us to question everything, even this, even now. So if this touched something in you, something honest, something quiet, something scared, something free, then maybe we are both already burning in the same flame, not to be reborn, but to light the world while we're still here. If that matters to you, subscribe. Every week, we burn questions until all that's left is silence. Comment your truth. Have you ever felt something continue long after you were gone?